Good evening and welcome to all the participants. I am very happy to invite you to this 73rd Wise Views Leadership Conversation with Mr. Ram Bhamidi. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ram. Ram, welcome and good evening to you.
Thank you, Mr. Sudhakar. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. What I will do now is I'll make a brief introduction and after that I'll hand it over back to you. Allow me to share my screen, please. So this is the 73rd in our series and today we are going to talk about your customers are talking about you on social media. Are you listening? So this is about social listening and Mr. Ram is the expert leader who is going to speak about this. So the talk as well as the Q&A should be able to consume 1 hour from now. That's the broad schedule. Let me read out the brief profile. Mr. Ram Bhamidi is an entrepreneur. He is currently the co-founder and CEO of Radar.com, a B2B SaaS platform based out of Singapore and Bangalore that helps businesses get actionable signals from social media data. The Radar platform has been dubbed by the media as Bloomberg Terminal for marketers and is used by Fortune 5000 clients across the world. Mr. Ram started his career with Tata Motors right after his engineering and also worked for Infosys, Goldman Sachs, Commonwealth Business Council, Bevin Party Gaming and Shadi.com before taking a plunge into entrepreneurship 9 years ago. So that's pretty impressive. Mr. Ram loves to operate at the intersection of business and technology and is a strong believer that technology can be a great enabler as well as game changer for businesses of all sizes. Mr. Ram is an avid traveler who strongly believes that travel opens up your mind and breaks many barriers, an eternal optimist who always finds a way to bounce back, and a lifelong learner looking to learn from anything that catches his eye, ranging from blockchain to astrology to medical uses of machine learning. As you all know, Mr. Ram is a graduate of IIT Kharagpur and IIM Ahmedabad, and has over 24 years of experience across India, UK, and Singapore in industries as diverse as software development, investment banking, online gaming, online matchmaking, etc. So wonderful profile. Thank you, Mr. Ram, once again for joining us. It's a pleasure and privilege to connect with you. I will also take one more moment to introduce Professor Prasad. Professor Prasad is the Director of Academic Wing at ICFAI Group. He is also the professor and course mentor for the online MBA program. His teaching areas are strategy and entrepreneurship. He has 3 decades of experience. He was also an entrepreneur. He worked in the corporate world and also in the academics. All put together is 3 decades. He is a PGDM from IIM Kolkata. Before that, BTech from IIT Bombay. He published several articles, books, and conference papers. So welcome, Professor Prasad, and thank you. So with this, I hand it over back to Mr. Ram. We are all waiting. That was a very, very interesting topic that you had indicated, Ram. Your customers are talking about you on social media. Are you listening? I think that's a very powerful topic to go by, and everyone is curious to listen to you. Over to you, Mr. Ram, and welcome again.
Thank you, Mr. Sudhakar. Looking forward to having hopefully a good presentation, but also an engaging kind of conversation. Thanks for having me today, and thanks for the wonderful introduction. Just give me a few seconds to share my screen. So the topic of today's discussion is your customers are talking about you on social media. Are you listening? These are the 7 things we're going to cover, 6, of course, in the presentation, and then there'll be a Q&A following this. I would like to speak about the social media landscape. I want to build a background for what is happening on the social media before we delve into the core topic of, are you listening? So what does the social media landscape look like today? What are people actually doing on social media today? And then we'll get into what is social listening. Some of you might be aware. I believe that the audience is a mix of working professionals. Some of you may be aware of what social listening might be, but may not have actually used it. Some of you may not be aware. So I'll start with an assumption that you do not know what it is, but we'll not get too technical or too detailed. We'll stay at a high level here. I'll move on to what insights can brands actually get from social listening. That's the core and crux of this, right? The idea is not just to listen, but to get insights and then act on those insights. We'll look at a case study, interesting one of Netflix. And then finally, I'm sure most of you would have this question, how can I do social listening for my brand or business? So we'll talk about that briefly. and then we'll get into the Q&A. Let's talk about the social media landscape now. Social media has been around for 20 plus years. It's not something that's just popped up. And there has been a significant increase in the social media adoption in the last 5 to 6 years. Let's just look at what does that mean. You'd probably be familiar with most of these logos: LinkedIn, Facebook, Vimeo, YouTube, Reddit, Twitter. We have Weibo and Quora, Instagram, TikTok. There are a bunch of others which came and disappeared or were shelved. So social media has been around for a while. However, it's becoming really, really big in the last 5 to 6 years. How big? Let's look at a few other platforms. On the previous slide, you would probably be aware of most of them, but I'll increasingly show you, more logos where you probably may not be aware, but they're important from a brand's perspective because conversations are not necessarily happening only on the biggest social media networks or platforms. So there are a lot of regional forums, regional social networks. There are blogs and sites where discussions might be happening. There might be, of course, news coverage of what's happening, and you may want to track that as well, and then even more. And I have logos here from multiple countries here, just to give you a sense of the fact that people are talking in vernacular languages. They're not necessarily having all these discussions in English. They're not necessarily talking only on the big 4 or 5 platforms. It's important that we are able to figure out where these conversations might be happening for your brand, and then eventually see how do you tap into it, listen to it, get insights, and then finally take action. Here's a landscape of social media users by region. On the left, there's a pie chart which shows regional breakdown. On the right, I've kind of summarized this. There are 4.55 billion active social media users as of today. 60% of these users are in Asia, and 17% in Americas, 13% in Europe, 5% in Africa, and others includes Australia and a bunch of other places not covered here. Asia continues to be a dominant place for social media, not just in terms of number of users, but also in terms of number of conversations. Also so because the 2 most populous countries in the world are in Asia, China and India. The world population today, 8 billion, 4.55 billion are on social media. Right? So you have 93% of the people who have access to the internet on social media, and 57% of the people of the whole population of the world is on social media. That's humongous. It's a lot of people on social media. An average user today is on 9 social platforms. An average user, and 400 plus million new social media users are getting added every year. As of today, there are 4 billion social media messages being shared every single day. That's a massive amount of big data. And it's a big challenge for brands and businesses to figure out, what do they do with all of this? We'll focus on that today. So what are people actually doing on social media? What are all these people, what are these 4.55 billion people actually doing on social media? A bunch of things. I'll not get into the details of this. The summary is there are a lot of activities that are happening on social media, some of which are very, very useful for brands. Some of them may not be that useful. But it's important that brands are able to get insights from all of this data and then figure out how to use that. So if you look at the actual number of conversations that are happening about brands and businesses, they run into tens of millions every single day. Let's look at some of these conversations. These are just indicative. I picked it from the Radar platform. You can see that people are talking about HDFC Life, Axis Bank, Flipkart. In this case, it's about customer care, for example. Some more examples. Mama Earth, McDonald's is likely to become a crisis. Look at the number of likes and shares this post has garnered. This is a user who has only a few hundred followers, but look at the number of likes this post has had. It basically talks about raw chicken in the burger. There's a Burger King, which is a positive kind of conversation. You can see that the sentiment is positive for this one. There are all of these conversations happening. There are negative, there are positive, there are a lot of neutral conversations happening as well. This gives you a sense of what people are talking about organically. These are not influenced by brands. These are organic conversations that people are having on social media on a day-to-day basis. Look at news. A lot of news today gets picked up from conversations that are happening on social media. This was a news from social media. This was the news of an Indigo passenger being manhandled by Indigo staff. And although the news was offline, so boycott Indigo started trending on multiple social media platforms after this. So social media has a big impact on crisis, either crisis begins on social media or social media amplifies the crisis. And therefore, it's important for brands and businesses to look at what is happening on social media first and then decide what they want to do about it. This is a response to what could potentially have been a crisis. A customer complaining that they did not want food from a non-Hindu rider because of whatever reasons. And Zomato took a pretty strong position. They were obviously, this was a difficult one. And this is a kind of message where a lot of coordination within the company is required, a very quick and swift one, including in this specific case, the CEO, Dipinder Goyal, also got involved, and the company actually took a position that they're not going to discriminate based on religion when it came to food delivery personally. So what is social listening? So there are two parts to social listening. The first part is tracking various platforms for mentions and conversations related to topics that are of interest to you. So that's the first part. You're tracking various platforms for mentions and conversations related to topics of interest to you. Now, topics of interest typically for most brands and businesses are their own brand and products, what their competitors are up to, and in some cases, things that are happening in the industry in general. The second part, which is even more important than just listening, is analyzing them and finally getting actionable insights and then taking suitable action. So the two parts, one of course is monitoring, where you're tracking things, and second, you're analyzing and taking action. So what can brands get from social listening? What kind of insights are we talking about? This one, I've come back to this. This could have been a potential crisis. There are a lot of posts which actually become a crisis. This was on its way to become a crisis, but it was kind of handled nicely by the brand, and it did not actually become as big a crisis. There was, of course, some dissent still from some section of social media, but by and large, this was dealt with positively by the brand, and overall conversations after the brand took a position were quite positive. Customer service, a lot of queries on several platforms are about customer service. Customers could be sending messages to you directly, to your brand, directly using a direct message. Most platforms today support a direct message option. Sometimes the customers are not actually sending you a DM or a direct message, but they are publicly talking about their issue, and the customer complaint is there for everyone to see. In this case, somebody called Antika is asking, obviously it's complaining to Vodafone, and the good thing that Vodafone did here was they responded pretty quickly to the customer, and they said they'll get in touch with them. That's a very positive thing. So it's important that you're proactive and responsive on social media. You are able to identify negative comments. You're able to respond to them, including responding on DMs asking for help. This specific case, unfortunately, another got created when the agent actually did not spell the name correctly. Instead of Antika, they used Ankita, for example, right? So it's also important that the agents who are responding are empathetic to the fact that there's already a customer who's unhappy, and if you're using their name, get it right. So some positive here in how the brand responded, but also got the name wrong, which created a completely different issue here. This is an example of Zappos, which is a retailer, and they are engaging in human conversations, right? I mean, they're making it look like they're a human and you're not talking to a robot here, for example, right? This is a good example of a brand which really believes in customer service and is engaging with conversations. This is not a complaint per se. However, the brand kind of got in. This is where listening plays a very important role. They actually did not reach out with a complaint, but the brand still kind of engaged in a conversation and created a positive impression in the mind of this customer. You can have conversations that could lead to improvement in your product or service, depending on which industry you are in. This one is for Slice, 1 out of 5 on the Play Store. And so if you're doing social listening, like I said before, it's important that you're doing it from a lot of different places, not just from the big social networks. Play Store and App Store are good places where people are genuinely leaving comments which can be used to improve your product, to improve your service, and of course, to improve your customer service as well, right? So this is a case where the customer has given 1 out of 5 primarily because they don't have the ability to lock the credit limit like some of the other banks do. So this would be a good feedback from a product perspective. The company can take it and say, we're going to build this, and go back to the customer and say, we've taken your feedback, we built it. You could do that right away also. We're taking your feedback and we pass this on internally and we'll work on it. That could create a positive experience for the customer. That would also acknowledge that customers' feedback is being taken into account by it, right? So these kind of feedbacks are left regularly on the Play Store, the App Store, on Google Business, multiple e-commerce sites where you can see that reviews on brands have been left. And there are a lot of other review sites depending on which sector you're in or which sector your company is in. There might be specific sites where these reviews are being left. And it's important that businesses are tracking all of this and responding to this. Another case of product improvement where Elon Musk responded personally to this message. The customer basically said, can you actually have an option where when I switch off the engine, the seat goes back and the steering wheel comes up, so it's easy for me to get out, right? And Elon Musk replied and said, we're going to add this. And they actually ended up adding this pretty soon because they were able to do this using a software and it did not require a hardware change. So when you're in close and frequent contact with people who are using your product, you are able to kind of use that information to improve your product or service. And in the long run, this is fundamental to building a successful business. Examples of brand monitoring and competitor tracking. It doesn't matter which industry you are in, what kind of products your company does. You need to do brand monitoring on social media. You need to do competitor tracking. All of our clients today, for example, do this. It's something that's like a very standard use case today. There are a lot of things that can be done with brand monitoring. You can, of course, look at the conversations. You can look at the engagement. You can figure out the sentiment. The key things to ask when you're doing brand monitoring and competitor tracking are, what are your sentiments for your brand? Like, is it positive? Is it negative? Is it neutral? If it's positive, how positive? Like, you can actually have a score for the sentiment. How many of those conversations are positive or negative? Over a period of time, is the sentiment getting better for your brand or worse for your brand? Did you do a campaign that was taken very well by your customers and other people on social media? Are your competitors doing things which are great and they can potentially be replicated by you quickly? What is your digital share of voice? So in some of your marketers, you would probably be using share of voice in the real world, or even a share of shelf if you are selling into supermarkets. The digital share of voice essentially is the total number of conversations about your brand versus your competitors, for example. And that does not tell you the quality of those conversations, but it's a good first metric to start with. And the second metric, of course, is what is the quality of those conversations? What is the sentiment around those conversations? And then you can drill down much deeper and say, what are these conversations actually about? Are they about my brand? Are they about a specific point about an attribute about my product or service? Are they talking about customer service? Are they talking about price? Are they talking about quality? It's possible to drill down and do a lot of things when you have all of this data coming in. There could be other questions that can also potentially be answered on social media. So is there a product or service that consumers desire, but it's currently not available? They might already be complaining about it, and that might be a good feedback for you to gather. Is there a topic that they are very frequently discussing that you could potentially use as a communication tool, either in your own content that you might be putting out on your pages and account, or in some other way to help improve your own brand image and perception? There are a lot of things that can be done. This is a pretty standard use case that most companies would typically use it for. Market research. Some of you, if you are from the pre-social media years, you would probably know how cumbersome market research can potentially get. From designing the questionnaire to administering the questionnaire to weeding out, results which are questionnaires that have not been properly filled in, to getting the insights. Used to be a pretty long and laborious process. Social media has changed all of that today. Social media is the world's biggest focus group that you can tap into today. The best part is this is all unprompted organic conversation. People are actually talking about it without you asking them to talk about you. So what you need to do is listen to these conversations to understand the needs and wants of your consumers. There's a lot of information available. There's demographic and psychographic information available. There is, of course, the topic, the post or the tweet that's also available. You can analyze the content. You can analyze who's talking about it to some extent. Not, of course, on all platforms and not 100%, but it's still possible to figure out a lot of demographic and psychographic information about your audience, which is a great input into understanding your consumer behavior. For example, Netflix got its first insight on the fact that people love to binge watch, right? And I'm talking about several years ago. And they use this very in a very proactive. I'll come to the case study. We'll talk about this. So if you are understanding how consumers are actually consuming your product and using your product, you can use that in a very good way. In this case, what Netflix actually did was they created socks which audience could wear, and people are actually sleeping off while binge watching. And those socks were like tech-enabled socks, and they would like switch off the show if it noticed that you went to sleep. That's a pretty interesting consumer behavior, and it's a pretty interesting use case. So not only did Netflix launch a new product that consumers could use, but they also kind of use that to produce a lot of positive social media conversations, about the socks itself. And finally, you can keep listening, you can keep analyzing, but there is no value in just doing that. The most important thing is you need to take action. In the case of customer service, for example, you need to take immediate action. In the case of market research, maybe this input goes into one of your other internal teams. It's important to aggregate that and take suitable action. Some more use cases. We don't have a lot of time, so not get into too much detail about what can be done with social media data, but there are branding and content opportunities. You can look at what kind of content is resonating with your audience. You can create more of that content. You can see what kind of content your competitors are churning out, what kind of content is being produced by other people in the industry, for example. There's a lot of that you can do, not just for your own media or earned media. If some of you are not familiar with these terms, owned media essentially is media that you own. So it could be the brand's own Facebook page or its own Instagram account or Twitter handle. Earned media is media or conversations that you earn because other people are just talking about you. And finally, there's the paid media where you're spending money to amplify your message, right? So you can track owned and earned media pretty easily on social media data, but it's also possible to figure out bumps and dips in your social media conversations based on what's happening with your paid ads. Those kind of correlations can also be established. So campaign tracking and performance, whether you're spending money on that campaign or not, it's possible to do that. A lot of data comes into social listening tools in a real-time basis. So you can, of course, get trends about what is happening with your own brand, but you can also see what is happening in the industry in general. And sometimes you get good insights that you can tap into. You get insights that you can use to create new content. Sometimes there are conversation clusters, for example. When you're looking at your own data, what are people talking about my own brand? You'd be surprised that sometimes when you launch a new campaign or a new product, there are interesting conversations that are happening, and conversation clusters can tell you about what those conversations are and then how you could potentially use those conversations. Influencers, for those of you who are on Instagram, or if you're not in India, you might be on TikTok as well. You would know what influencers are. Influencers are mostly individuals who are paid by the brand to amplify a message. And TikTok's pretty big on influencers. Instagram's fairly big on influencers. Influencers do exist on other platforms also. So if you're a brand who wanted to run a campaign, and in the old digital world, you would typically use Google ads or Facebook ads to do it. Some of these media budgets are now shifting so that brands can actually work directly with influencers. Some of the brands want to work with influencers because they see them as more authentic. They're able to see the ROI on that work that they do with the influencer, because everything is very transparent in terms of who posted what and how much engagement it got, how much impact something created. Your ability as a brand or a business to discover those influencers who have a positive brand affinity towards you and are creating a good impact is quite important in your ability to run successful campaigns on social media. So the ability to discover influencers and work with them, they're all good use cases for social media data. Finally, insights about your customer and audience. Who are these people, right? So it's not just enough to say people are talking about us. Who are these people? Are these males? Are these females? What is their age group? What is their profession likely to be? Some of these would be guesses based on machine learning algorithms, but they are intelligent guesses and are very useful from a marketer's perspective in getting really good insights about your audience. And then you can, of course, take it further and say, what topics are they interested in? Do they have a positive brand affinity towards me? Are they already working with my competitors? A lot of this information can be used by brands to run good campaigns on social media and make their campaigns even better if they're already running. A quick a case study. I'm conscious of the time, so we will not spend a lot of time on the case study. There's a link over here that you can go to later if you want to look at this case study in more detail. But quickly, Netflix is a great example of a company that uses social media effectively. For example, building good customer engagement is what one of the things that they're doing. Responding to this is what I was talking about. The Netflix socks essentially was in response to viewers who are falling asleep while binge watching a show. You can read about this on the blog if you're interested. Creating content that their audience wants. Now, to be able to do this, you first need to understand who your audience on social media is. What do they want? And finally, be then able to create content that they not just want, but they actually love, and they become ambassadors of your product or service. Posting content on trending topics. If you're able to figure out what is currently trending, on Twitter, for example, or Instagram or YouTube or any other platform, a responsive brand can then use that information to hop onto those trends and then weave the show's content. In this case, they actually use one of their show's content into the current trend. So this is both an art and a science. There's a bit of creativity in weaving that magic, but also science in figuring out what the trending topics are and, should I actually get onto it or not? You can create hype using social media. A lot of brands do this successfully. Netflix definitely does this. Before they launch new shows, they use social media to create a lot of hype. Memes are very, very popular on social media. You can create good memes which go viral, and that creates a lot of buzz, and you are able to create a lot of impact. Great customer relationship is a given on social media. Today's customer expects brands to be present all the channels. They expect an omni-channel kind of customer support. A lot of younger people today expect brands to respond on social media. So social media can be a great place to build great customer relationships. You can engage with customers on a regular basis. You can also respond to their queries and complaints. You have a delighted customer here who had a very, very pleasant experience. The other one is a very quick response to a customer. Doing all of this helps brands build a great customer relationship on social media. Star power, if you have the money to, in this case, money was not even used. They actually tagged a celeb and the celeb responded. That's fantastic for a brand. You didn't have to spend any money on it, and you were able to leverage the star power. This is the link. You can go back and look at this case study. So final question is, this is all interesting. How do I use social listening for my brand or business? Now, this depends, of course, on how big your brand or business is. Some of you may be entrepreneurs who just started off and not too many conversations might be happening on social media. Some of you might be working for large companies where a lot of conversations are happening, and you want to really figure out, how do I use all of these insights and how do I start taking good action based on all of this? So there are, of course, two ways to do this. If you're a small brand or you don't have the money to pay for a tool, you can use manual searches across various social media sites. So you make a compilation of everywhere you think discussions might be happening. The process, of course, would be fairly manual, but it's possible to do it for a really small brand. If you're a mid-size or a large brand, it's probably better to have access to a good social listening platform that you of course want to make sure that they have good source coverage, because discussions like you saw could be happening on the large social networks. It could be happening on the regional sites. India has a Twitter clone called Koo, for example. There might be discussions happening on Koo. There might be discussions happening on e-commerce review sites on Amazon, Flipkart, Myntra, for example, in India. They could be happening on Play Store and App Store. You can't actually, if you're a large brand or a mid-sized brand, you really cannot go to all of these manually and then start responding to them. Secondly, unless you have a unified place where you're getting all of this data, it's difficult for you to get the insights that you really want for some of the other things like improving product or consumer behavior and things like that. The platform, of course, should do basic things like sentiment really well for multiple languages. It should, like I was talking about conversation clusters, there are predictive algorithms that can predict a crisis before it happens, and it's great for PR managers. If the platform has some of these, then it'll be great to get deeper insight. And finally, it should help you take action. So do they have a response module where you can actually respond from within the platform to both, to multiple platforms? You know, if it's a tweet, can you respond to the tweet from within the platform, to a direct message from within the platform across multiple platforms? It could be Twitter, it could be Facebook, it could be something else also. One of those two options are, of course, available. What's more important, of course, is to establish an objective for what you want to do. There are a lot of things that can be done on social media, but it's important that you're very clear about what your objective is and then go about to solve for that objective. That brings us to the end of my presentation. Happy to get into a Q&A session.
Thank you, Mr. Ram. That's an amazing, amazing things that you have packed in for such a short span of time that we have allocated for this initial presentation for you. In fact, the landscape that you have painted is so huge, and that is a reality. Social media is the big thing here. And most of us in businesses and in personal life, we encounter social media. The results of it, the ramifications of it are far reaching. So it's an amazingly important content that you have created for us this evening. Thank you so much. I don't want to waste any more time in summarizing it, except for the fact that 4.55 billion active social media users are there, and Asia is more social than the rest. That is one where it began, and the numerous advantages and applications that we can have by looking for some data, tracking them, analyzing them, and using it, what you call actionable insights. I think that's where the crux of it lies. And there are numerous applications where we can look at. But one word of caution or one word of observation from my side. Today we have leaders joining from across industries. I can see the names on the list. Some of the leaders from Hyderabad, Bangalore, Mumbai, some of them from the US also have joined. I welcome all of them once again if they have joined a little late. Thank you for joining so regularly, and especially for this particular session. Many people, diverse leaders have come and joined today. Thank you very much. So one word of observation is that social media, whether it is business or personal, let's start with personal. On simple platforms like Facebook, which is a little more relatable, a lot of us do not read the content that our followers are actually conversing with us. They're conversing only with us, but we don't listen and we don't take the signal. I mean, that's where I think we are dropping the signals. That's a very, very important trait to actually build ourselves about. Your followers actually don't respond if they don't like your content. And some of them give you signals that you should not be posting similar things again. These are very important things to pick up. And there are some people who, without any stakes, they come and keep disturbing you. We should also know how to actually handle them without publicly defaming or shaming them. Very, very sensitive, very simple actions, but a lot of lessons for us on how to go about applying the same on at a business level on a scale which is a little larger as well. I think we don't read the signals. That's where is the problem. We don't even converse. And even the followers actually don't follow. For example, you ask a question as simple as, where is this from? And you say it is from Istanbul. So it has been answered in the beginning. And a lot of other people who join late, they keep on asking the same question. Actually, they don't scroll up and read. So our attention span for normal things, positive things is so short. And if it is negative, it gets amplified so quickly, and a large number of people get out to the bandwagon to actually add a little more weight to that negativity. In personal postings on Facebook that we generally see. I think there are lessons here. We can handle it. The damage is smaller, and probably along the lines of guidance that Mr. Ram has mentioned, we should apply the same to businesses. And of course, it should be through tools, systemic tools that can handle these things and sentiments in a long-lasting and foolproof methods. Of course, actions have to be taken. Decisions have to be swifter and faster. Creativity, as Mr. Ram said, it is an art and science both together while we are handling, especially when there are crises it is got to be both creativity as well as science that is supposed to help us. So thank you, Mr. Ram, for this wonderful. I'm quite excited about.
Just one note on that, Mr. Sudhakar.
Yeah.
I think what's happening on social media, it's humans who are actually conversing on social media, leaving the whole bot issue aside, which of course is a problem that Elon Musk is also dealing with. But leaving that aside, you have humans having conversations on social media, and these humans are just manifesting the same behavior that they have offline. So when you're listening, when you're speaking and I'm listening, for example, most people are listening with the objective of replying or responding rather than to kind of understand and imbibe and then figure out what I want to do with that. If you can keep that aside, if the main objective of listening is not to respond, a lot of social media conversations, for example, you don't actually have to respond, right? So if your main objective is I will listen with an objective of not replying but getting insights and then figuring out what I want to do with that, that would go a long way in real life as well as on social media.
Wonderful. That's a very, very good point. We don't have to listen to it from the point of view of responding, but I think we should have a takeaway from that, and that should be the objective. Thank you so much on that. What we do now quickly is, in the interest of time, we'll start the Q&A session, and I'll request Professor Prasad to start the cluster number 1. And in the meantime, I request all the participants to raise their hands when we come to the cluster number 2. I'll come back at that time and we will take questions directly. We'll open the window and you can have a conversation with Mr. Ram. So stay there, keep punching your questions, and at the same time, keep raising your hand when we ask for it. Okay, over to you, Professor Prasad. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rao. Indeed, a very insightful landscape on social listening that we have been presented with. Let me start with the journey that Mr. Ram brings to the table. Could you please elaborate on how you got into entrepreneurial mode, Circus Social 2012 to Radar? What are the phases that you've come across?
That's a trick question, Professor Prasad. I wasn't expecting to talk about my own journey, but it's been interesting. I've had 24, 25 years of experience across India. I was in UK for 10 years, and I always wanted to do something. That bug was always in the mind, that entrepreneurial bug. My first exposure to social media, I've been on social media since 2005 at least. My first account was on LinkedIn, and later on with some of the other ones. So personally, I've been on social media for 17 years now. Professionally, I've been on social media at least since 2010. When I came back from UK, I was the CMO of Shadi.com, and for a couple of years, I was doing a lot of things with digital marketing and social media. We did some really interesting things over there, and it got me really excited about social media. So when that entrepreneurial bug had to be actioned, I knew that it had to be on social media. So the first thing we did when we set up Circus Social was we were working with social media. We were creating social media applications, and then we saw the need to productize what we were doing on a manual basis. So that kind of evolved to we creating the platform, which today is Radar. And a lot of clients across Asia and Europe and US use our platform today. So we work with social media data primarily, but we've increasingly seen that brands want not just social, but all kinds of digital data. So the scope has kind of expanded, but primarily we help them listen to conversations, respond to conversations, publish content, and finally use influencers to work on campaigns. So it's like a unified platform now, and we're quite proud of what we've created.
Excellent. I think with that, we move to the next question. From the service side and from perhaps influencer side, you have delved on certain points. Now coming to the business side of it, social media and business side of it. Targeting is a strategic issue in campaigns. And often we are not sure whether we've got to the right target group. Of course, things are better than in print. But how do you implement this in digital campaigns? What are the limitations? Can you elaborate with the case?
Okay. I think this question is about paid digital ads. Slightly different from the topic that I was talking about. However, I do have expertise in this space. I can still talk about it. If you use platforms like Google or Facebook to run your ads digitally, and we're talking about digitally, those are, of course, the two biggest ones. You could also run it across ad networks and publisher sites and other places. There are a lot of other places where you can run ads digitally. Google also helps you target and retarget ads on a lot of these publisher sites, for example. Let's focus on Google and Facebook for now. So they, of course, have a lot of targeting options, but there is zero transparency in terms of who actually saw the ad. And there have been reported cases of click frauds and other kinds of fraud with advertisers' money. There are some really large companies that have pulled out of Facebook and Google, for example, for similar reasons, right? There's no transparency on the ROI. You have a lot of data on banners, on impressions, on clicks, on click-through rates, but you really don't have too much data on who actually saw it, right? That's a big problem, and there is no easy solution to it. I think one solution would be to not just have two big players, but to have hundreds of other options for advertisers to work with that would kind of solve this problem. That's also one of the reasons why some of these brands are now working with influencers, right? So because with influencers, what happens is which influencers you're working with. And you know that they're authentic. You can actually see who's working on your campaign, what are they actually posting, what is the impact that has been created. So no easy answers to how do I exclude fraud completely, because Google and Facebook are really big, and unless they want to share more data, it's not possible. But brands are now using social media increasingly to bypass the typical digital ad framework.
Thank you. I think that gives us some indicator of what actually is happening. The next question is, of course, when you're trying to come back to social listening, are there any frameworks, popular metrics which are used, like you have the Net Promoter Score for customer satisfaction. In terms of social listening, do you have some sort of a framework or some kind of a score which kind of gives an indicator as to what's happening for your brand?
Yeah. So there are a lot of metrics. So social media, if you look at the raw conversations, you will see that there's a lot of text, there are a lot of images, there are a lot of videos, for example, right? However, technology has advanced so much today that, so we, for example, at Radar, we analyze images to find out if a brand logo exists. What is the scenery in which the conversation is happening or the image has been uploaded. So if somebody is drinking Coke and sitting in a park, for example, we know that he's drinking Coke in a park, right? It's possible to use technology to get a lot of insights. In terms of metrics that brands can track, the key metrics are quite similar to what you might track if you were working in a traditional marketing kind of space, right? So the volume of conversations, for example, is the basic one to start with. How many conversations are happening? How many people are talking about me? Are those conversations positive or negative? So what is the emotion or sentiment around those conversations? Those, I would say, are the key ones when it comes to the conversation itself or the post itself. Now, there is, of course, a lot of metadata that's available for each post. So if you have a YouTube video or if you have a tweet, people like it, people share it, people retweet it, people comment on it, and all of this information is available. And therefore, you're able to see what is the engagement for your posts, your competitors' posts, or other people who are just talking about it. So if somebody is complaining about your brand, like I showed that example of a person who had only 300 or 400 followers, but his engagement was 25,000 because the topic really resonated with a lot of people and they started sharing, liking, and retweeting. Right? As a brand, you can track the impact of posts, either on an individual post level or at an aggregate level. So there's impact, there is traction. Sometimes crisis happens because, technically speaking, in terms of metrics, there are two lead indicators for a crisis. One is a negative sentiment of the post, and the second is the traction that it is getting in the first few minutes or first few hours, right? It's getting really fast traction. That this is a negative post and it's really accelerating, and therefore it's likely to become a crisis. Some of that information is used by companies like ours and others to create predictive algorithms about whether a crisis might happen 8 hours from now or not, right? So just to summarize, volume of conversations, share of voice, and then sentiment and emotions. Then you have derived metrics like impact and traction, engagement, of course. There's a lot of other metrics that we have. I'm not sure if we should get so deep, but we use machine learning, for example, to come up with a lot of other insights. So, for example, there's qualitative analysis that can be done, and there's quantitative that can be done, and there's some quantitative that can be done to improve your qualitative. For example, we use machine learning to figure out what are people actually talking about. So for somebody who says that my car is great, but the lights don't work, right? Is it a positive sentiment? Is it a negative sentiment? It's positive for one thing and negative for another, right? And then, when you have a million of those conversations, how do you group all of these to get aggregate level insights? So there's some metrics that can be created around that. What attributes are people actually talking about over a longer period of time? And when you look at time, you can actually see shifts in sentiments over a period of time. Those are also useful metrics to track.
Thank you. So what you say is that there are some basics and there are some related to engagement, and therefore they can be used as far as monitoring is concerned. The next question, one from the audience, is about a lot of noise out there on social media, and the intensity of a comment is not easy to understand in terms of social media. So how do you tune out such noise? How do you understand what really counts?
So I'll come back to the previous question, right? So first, of course, there is, of course, a lot of noise, and people are tagging brands or talking about brands, even if they're or mentioning brands, even if what they're saying is not actually about the brands. You'd actually say something and then you tag the brand or put a hashtag about the brand. You just want to ride on a trend or just annoy the brand. So it could be that. It could also be a genuine kind of a complaint, right? So from if you're looking at what is noise on social media, right? Noise in social media is like spam on your Google Mail, right? And Google does a pretty good job of identifying spam. So there are two parts to this. One is what is the content of that email, and second is the source of the spam, for example. So in this case, a lot of fake or bot accounts, for example, are people who don't have too many followers, right? Their content does not get shares typically. They might be liking and sharing and tweeting and commenting, but people are not actually commenting or sharing. You don't have engagement on them. So technology can help in some way to identify those kind of accounts where the person is likely to be a spam or a fake account and therefore a troublemaker. There are other cases where they may have a genuine complaint but not too many followers. So it's important that technology is used but not misused. So coming back, this is a difficult problem. A lot of big companies are also dealing with this problem. How do I eliminate noise? There are two or three things that we typically do. One, of course, is what do you want to listen to, right? You don't want to listen to 4 billion conversations. Like nobody can listen to 4 billion conversations every day. It's just mind-boggling. So the first thing is to create your objective on what is it that you really want to track, right? So for example, if you were Jaguar, the car maker, right? And you said, give me all data for Jaguar. You will get a lot of data that is not about Jaguar, the car, but about Jaguar, the animal, right? So it's important that you're creating your rules to get data that actually makes sense for you. So you would probably say, I don't want to see animals and I don't want to see jungle and forest or whatever. And there's a risk of genuine data being missed out, but obviously there's a balance that needs to be had between these two. So it's a two-pronged attack to make sure that your rules are more tight and compact and pulling the kind of data. So it could be a bit of an iterative process, but you go through that. And the second is to say, I do not really want, there are a lot of algorithms that can be created based on engagement, impact, interaction. So you basically say, I don't want to see data from people who the system thinks is spam or bot, right? So we have a spam detection algorithm, for example, in our platform, which uses a combination of these factors and provides a spam score, right? And then you can say, I automatically want to exclude spam, or I'm okay to see that and decide for my own. The other thing that can be done is there are machine learning models that can be created where the user interacts with data and says, this is irrelevant. Sometimes it's an ad, right? Sometimes it's actually a bot. You can actually train the model and make it better by interacting with it.
Excellent. So it is possible, and it depends on how you want to focus, set objectives, set rules, and more importantly, what I don't want.
What you don't want is as important to exclude as what you do want.
Yes. Okay. Now coming to India, what is the kind of adoption rule of such tools in India, and how seriously is it considered? How much of it is there compared to what's happening globally, particularly in the developed world?
So if you look at there are 2 or 3 different kinds of businesses. Okay, let's focus on, let's say if you look at the enterprises, there's very good adoption across all countries. Whether you look at West, whether you look at India, the larger enterprise clients have already adopted social listening platforms and social listening tools, and they're using it effectively to figure out. So some of the examples that I had here, For example, they're obviously using tools, somebody like Zomato, for example, or another client, which has, thousands of conversations happening every day. It's impossible. You might have a 30 or 40 agent team, which is responding to all of these conversations. It's impossible for you to manage all of this without actually having some kind of a tool. So the question is, do you actually use a third-party tool, or, have you created something in-house? Some companies, especially more tech-focused companies, may have created something which works to some extent in-house. But for the larger companies, there's very good adoption. A lot of B2C companies, for example, the key thing is, are people talking about you on social media, right? If you're a small company where nobody's talking about you, or if you're a B2B company, a complete B2B company where nobody really talks about, pharma, for example, is a difficult one, right? Because the patients are not really going to social media and talking about brands like FMCG or automotive or financial services, right? So how many conversations? There are conversations, and there's a lot of market research that pharma companies do. But in general, are people really talking about you on social media? Not is one thing. And how big are you, and how many conversations are happening? Those are important. Now, when you look at the small to mid-sized companies, for example, not the really large enterprises, not the Fortune 1000 clients, there is an acceleration in the pace at which companies have now started adopting these tools in India. And I'm talking specifically about India. In the US, we have clients which are really small businesses, less than 10 employees, still using the tool because they think it's valuable to, even if you're launching a product, for example, you could do research on your competitors, you could do research on the industry, and a lot of this research can be done organically at a very low cost compared to the traditional ways of administering, surveys and questionnaires. So who's using it? I think the mix is different from the Western world to India, but there is increasing adoption even in the small and mid-sized businesses. One thing that I think did not happen for India or even globally was that the really advanced technology, using machine learning and AI and having the really advanced insights was really not available to the small businesses. That's something that we are, of course, trying to democratize. And in the coming years, you would see a lot of small and mid-sized businesses using it as well, because the price points are now a lot more affordable.
Thank you. So what you're really saying is, as far as B2C is concerned and large enterprise is concerned, there's not much of a difference between what's happening in India and what's happening abroad. And perhaps there may be some kind of a difference as far as the small enterprise goes, but it is accelerating in that particular space.
Yes.
And also that products of social listening which come with AI and ML are more for the large enterprises and less for the smaller ones. And we are trying to do something about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent. So now I come to the last in the series. Again, I'm getting back to business here. I do see that there is the MR angle and there's a social listening angle, but customer acquisition cost, this is coming from the audience also in multiple ways. Customer acquisition cost is a cause of concern for digital, not just social. And how do we know? Because people throw up a lot of figures on ROI. And the ROI, when you bring revenue in, is a completely different perception. So how do you handle this? Are there ways by which you can actually understand and be concerned about this? And how do you reduce it?
See, customer acquisition cost is primarily when you're spending money directly on the two things. You're either spending money on people and you're getting an ROI on that, or you're spending money on ads and other things where you're actually paying somebody money and you want to look at the ROI. I think it's important to make that distinction. When you're spending money on Google, Facebook, or other ways of spending ads, there's of course how many. You can track everything from clicks, from impressions to clicks to, on your website. You can, of course, integrate an analytics software and say how many conversions happened or how many leads got generated. Did they fill a form? Did they download something? You can have your events to track, and there's ROI that you can do. If you're an e-commerce site, for example, the cost of acquiring a customer, is a very important metric and is a big cost of, in your overall mix. It's quite tricky because they may have signed up, but they may have never bought. So there's some external data outside your system, and there's internal data after they have signed up. There are ways to do attribution. There are ways to figure out ROI for that. But I think I would like to focus on the other part, which is less spoken about. So if you look at you spending money on people, so if you had a social media manager, for example, or if you had an SEO manager, for example, this was effort they were putting in to make sure that you were more visible, right? So your social media manager who's able to engage with your customers, for example, can drive a lot higher ROI, for example, for your brand. Your customer support person who's responding to queries in a timely way could create brand ambassadors, in terms of customers. So for situation one where you're actually paying money, you can. It's all a math. It's all the numbers are available. It's possible to do the analysis and figure out what the cost of acquiring a customer is. The key question is when you're talking about cost of acquiring a customer, you're typically talking about at an aggregate level, right? Where the paid and the not paid activity is kind of being clubbed. Now, this is where the magic comes in, the magic of social media and the magic of even SEO, for example. That's not the topic today, but when you have people organically clicking through, let's say, search results and coming to your site, you didn't pay anything for it, but they may convert. They actually convert better because they were actually searching for you and they found your site and they clicked through to it. Right. So I think the question should be using social media, for example. How can I reduce my overall cost of acquiring a customer? You're spending money on your paid ads, and then you're using your people. So the key thing is, do I understand what can be done with social media data? Do I understand how I can create campaigns that can go viral? Can I use all of this data and insights to make my content better that's more likely to go viral? Those are some of the key questions that need to be answered to figure out if you're able to create viral campaigns on social, for example, your cost of acquiring customers could go significantly down. In one of my previous experiences, we had created a very viral game, right? It went globally viral. That was not our core business, but it went viral and a lot of people are talking about it and a lot of media coverage was received for that. Now, if you're able to do some of those things, if you're able to create brand ambassadors of your customers through your customer support agents, those would overall reduce the cost of an average cost of acquiring a customer. If you're focusing only on the paid ads, then of course you need to focus on that funnel, but have a good attribution model so that you're able to see what led to the final conversion, because a user may take 5 different actions before he actually converts on your site.
Excellent. So I think some of the points are that first is the people angle, which normally doesn't get looked at, and you have given some suggestions on how that can happen. Extremely important. The other is the attribution model. And the third, that social media can be supportive to the overall cost of reducing customer acquisition cost. Thank you very much. With this, we end this cluster. I hand it back to Professor Rao.
Thank you very much. Sometimes I get envious why Professor Prasad is taking so much of time in the cluster number 1 when we have already hit 5:30 p.m. But anyway, my regret is that it has been scheduled from 4:30 to 5:30. I think that is the biggest mistake I made for a topic like this. We should have actually extended the time, which we will now. And I request you to please bear with us. We'll take a few questions. And in this cluster, we'll open the window for some of the participants who can ask the questions directly to you. But I'll take just a couple of questions, maybe 2 or 3. And I'll keep rotating. Srikanth, can I request you to see who all have raised the hands and please add them so that they are ready up on the screen. So the first question I would like to take, Mr. Ram, is that how does sentiment analysis work in 2022? I think basically the participant is trying to understand in today's time, how does sentiment analysis work and what are the lessons that we can take from there?
Very good question. Sentiment analysis has been around for several years now in various forms, and it's been evolving. So let's focus on what some of the large companies like Amazon and Google and Microsoft are doing. Is they're creating generic models for sentiment analysis. You could sign up and can start using it. The key thing there is, what is the accuracy when you are trying to use a model like that for social media data, right? And when you're talking about social media data, there are a lot of nuances. Nobody is, there are multiple languages to start with. Secondly, people are talking in Hindi, for example, or Telugu or Tamil, but they're actually using the English script. Third is they're actually mixing languages. Fourth is there's a social media slang and colloquialism. WYD, for example, there's no word, but if you're a social media aficionado, you know what that means. What you're doing, right? What are you doing, right? There are a lot of those things, there are a lot of those nuances. And so what has happened over the last few years, and we are, of course, at the forefront of making that happen, is we put over 100 million data points through our machine learning models. And all of this is social media data to make sure that the accuracy keeps improving. Right? So that's a key thing that's happened for us. Some of the other companies are also trying to do this. So what has happened for social media data, which has its own nuances, you have to make sure that you're training the models and you're training it with a lot of data to make sure that the accuracies are high. Right? It's easy to take an off-the-shelf model, put it on social media, and be frustrated that it has only 45% accuracy. Right? So for example, things like, thank you for losing my baggage. Right? Somebody is being sarcastic when they are tagging an airline. Thank you for losing my baggage. There's a lot of sarcasm over there. Like, how do you detect that sarcasm in the context of social media data, for example? Right? He's obviously not thanking. If you look at thank you, a lot of sentiment models will say, okay, this is a positive sentiment. He's actually happy and thanking. Right? He's not. He's obviously angry, frustrated, and is being sarcastic now. Right? So the key thing is what has changed over the years is social media has evolved. A lot of new languages are being used. A lot of new networks have kind of joined. The sources have increased. The kind of language that's used on social media is quite different to how it's used in normal conversational language outside of social media. So it's important that training models are able to use this and improve the accuracy. So we've, like I said, we put more than 100 million data points to our own sentiment models, and we focus a lot on Asian languages where none of our competitors are actually doing a very good job, either in terms of source coverage or in terms of how accurate the sentiment is. Right? 45 or 50% sentiment accuracy is not good enough. We're already at 80 to 90% of sentiment accuracy. So the way it's happened is, of course, putting a lot of real data, real social media data through the training models. And then there are nuances with each client and each industry that you work with, right? It's not a one model that fits all. So you create generic models, you create language models, and then you can have client-specific or industry-specific models. So we allow our clients, for example, to create their own models because they may have some nuances within their industry where the sentiment actually works differently. So it's a combination of using a three-layered sentiment model, putting a lot of data through sentiment models. So it's I would say 2022 is quite different from 2015 in terms of accuracy, in terms of the amount of data being generated, and in terms of how useful clients are finding it. At the end of the day, like I said, the focus cannot just be on listening. If your sentiments are wrong, then you're listening to the wrong thing, and you're then taking the wrong action. So it's important that you get it to a level where you feel confident and comfortable that I can actually take decisions based on this data.
Amazing. I think the summary of what you have mentioned is that in today's time and age, accuracy of your sentiment is extremely important. And for that, large data points will have to be used. And generic models is a passe. I think we need to use machine learning to arrive at very, very accurate thing. For that, data is supposed to be large. And in your
one more point, maybe I should just highlight. I think the nuances of social media are completely different. They have to be taken care of by the model. What has, I think, also changed, if you go back to the first sentiment models, a lot of them used to be keyword based, right? So like I said, thank you, for example, would keyword based say positive sentiment, right? The intent was missing in the initial models. I think a lot of progress has happened now, and we're able to figure out the intent of that. So we are able to do that at an aggregate level. We are also able to figure out sentiments for individual products or attributes that are mentioned. Like I said, this is a great car. Audi is a great car, but I hate the tires, right? Are you able to get to that level, dissect it and say, the car is great overall, but there's still a bit of dissatisfaction with the tires, right? And how do you use that information for improving the car, improving the tire, improving the product? Those things are now possible. I think those were not possible a few years ago.
Those things are possible now. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much on that. I think, as you mentioned, that Asia is using these social media platforms in a large way, as big as 60%. And these continents and countries are more diverse in terms of people, in terms of their demographics and psychographics. They are far more diverse compared to some of the demographically stable countries which are hosting some of these large platforms. They are native to those platforms, whereas the users are actually not native, in a sense that the demographics that India can provide in terms of data and, as you have mentioned, the mixed language thing. Leave alone the sarcasm part of it. the mixed language thing is a concoction that only we can do here in India. I think if big players are working on sentiment analysis, and that analysis, if it is done by Indian players, I think the solutions are far more effective than otherwise. That's probably is the takeaway.
I would call us more of an Asian player than just an Indian player. When we started off Radar, we saw that some of our competitors, I don't want to name competitors, but some of our competitors in Europe and US, for example, their coverage, they're the great companies, and I admire some of them. Their coverage of data, their sentiment accuracy for European languages or Mexican and Brazilian, for example, was great. But when it came to Asia, nobody had done that kind of work because individually each country was not attractive enough. Radar is like we are like born in Asia for Asia, right? So we're looking at multiple languages. We've actually done this model that I was talking about for more than 40 Asian languages, including all of the Indian languages. So if you're willing to put that kind of effort in, you will get to really high levels of accuracy, and therefore the moat that we have when we talk to potential customers in Asia and they're comparing us with anybody else, they see that our ability to get data from Asian sources, our ability to process that and understand that at scale. We're talking about more than 40 million conversations every day that we're processing today. A lot of this, we're a big data company. So a lot of that is happening at scale. And therefore we need to make sure that our automated systems are done in such a way that they're getting to the desired level of accuracy for decision making.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You and I are saying the same thing. I think you are more poised towards accuracy being an Asian player compared to another one if it is sourced or located outside of Asia. So thank you. We will go to the next question. This is about negative commentary, adverse reactions on social media. What are the best practices that you can share which where we can probably control or deal with these negative mentions or adverse comments on social media?
Every brand gets these negative comments. Some of them become a crisis also. I think brands need to, first of all, have a plan to deal with negative comments. What is my plan? How do I deal with this? And when you're actually responding, so response, of course, is one part of it. But what is the plan? Some of the things cannot be responded by the agent, so they may have to look back inside. The Zomato thing that you saw, food is a religion, is not something that the agent would have decided on his own and tweeted, right? There's obviously a very quick channel that they have set up internally to figure out that we can do this. Right. So one is, what is the structure you have in place and what is the support that the frontline people get for dealing with negative comments? Are you empowering your agents to deal with these kind of situations or not? Coming back to the response itself, I think you need to be in your response. People on social media do not have time to wait for a brand to respond. In fact, in one of the surveys that we had done, 72% of the people expected the brand to respond within 24 hours. And this is much higher than what their expectation from email or some other channel, for example, right? And what this means is you need to be quick. So you definitely need to have a way to quickly respond. Second thing is you need to be empathetic to the customer, right? I mean, the rules are exactly the same as if the customer had called you on the phone. The rules are exactly the same. You cannot have different rules. You have to be, you have to empathize with the customer because especially if it's a negative one and it's complaining, you need to empathize with them. You have to assure them that, the problem will be resolved. And then finally, make sure that, there is a process to get that resolved. If the agent cannot do it, then what is the internal process to deal with that situation? Sometimes, for example, we have an automotive client where the problem may be with the dealer. And there's nothing that the agent can actually do about it, except that he can feed it into the internal ticketing software. But somebody else actually has to go and figure out what the problem is and solve that. And once it's solved, they can go back and say, this has been solved. So the question is, are you empowering your agents? Number one. Number two, do you have a process internally to deal with situations where the agents are not able to deal with this? And finally, I think the agents need the right kind of training to deal with social media. Right? Empathy and swiftness in response are very, very important attributes. A big no-no for any brand is to ignore anything that you spot as being negative. it's likely to snowball into something really, really big. There are brands which have ignored things for several days, and they've realized that it's become a really big crisis which they could have nipped in the bud if they've responded immediately. Most customers, you would notice, are actually okay and even happy if you respond and you resolve their query. The issue becomes really big if you refuse to deal with that. The other thing is sometimes the complaints are not legitimate, or the perception of the customer is that the brand is at fault or the business is at fault. And therefore, it's important that you are able to quickly get the facts right and communicate in a very open and honest way what your version of the story is. The Indigo slide that I had, for example, the manhandling of the passenger, the initial response from the brand was not great. They fired the guy who took the video. He was an employee, right? So the whistleblower was actually fired. And when news came out of that, this was instead of dealing with the complaint, that was the first thing that they actually did. And that snowballed on social media. And finally, very senior people at Indigo called the passenger and apologized. But the thing is, it didn't have to go through that process. So therefore, is the customer service agent empowered to decide what happens to that whistleblower? No. So there are things which are beyond the control of the agent, and therefore you need to have a very good support structure to make sure that they feel empowered. And if they are not able to respond, then there's at least a quick process internally to escalate that and get it resolved.
Excellent. A very quick summary is that strict no to ignore such negative comments for brands. We need to respond to it. Sometimes people are very happy if you respond, even if you don't resolve it altogether. Second is we need to be swift, as we have mentioned. And the third one is to have a structure in place to the support system which actually deals with it, or empower the agent who is handling this in the front line. Amazing. And brands, 72% of the people expect brands to actually respond within 24 hours. I think these demands and these expectations will keep going up as we move forward. So our response mechanism will have to be as swifter and as planned. So one has to plan for it. Without planning, I think we will not get anywhere. So wonderful. Thank you so much for that patient answer. The next one is about how do you deal or identify fake reviews? I'm clubbing two questions that are in front of me. How do you deal or identify fake reviews across several social media platforms? On the other hand, is there any evidence of trust issues created by data on social media, since authentication of the source is difficult? Okay. For example, a lot of trolls happen with fake reviews or fake commentary or fake IDs. That is on one end. On the other end, even for businesses, data authentication is going to be a problem. So how do we deal with these?
Okay, let's talk about the fake reviews first. Yes, there are fake reviews, and they happen on every platform. There are two things that can be done from a platform perspective. So for example, if there are fake reviews on Google Play Store or Apple App Store or other places, the platforms are dealing with those fake reviews in one way. They have ways to figure out, like I said before, you can, if you don't have a lot of followers, people are not engaging with you, you have a one-time comment. There are a bunch of things that the original platform can use to figure out if it's a fake, and Google and Apple and others are removing fake reviews all the time. This is something that they do on an ongoing basis all the time. From your perspective, you don't have control over that. You can trust that they will make some progress on it. But from your perspective, you need to take the reviews with a pinch of salt for two reasons. Most people, when they are happy, they don't go and post a positive review. But when you're unhappy, you're more likely. So I'm talking about the genuine customers here, right? So the reviews are already slightly negatively skewed. And if somebody is voluntarily and willingly, adding more negative reviews, for example, your competitor, if you think that your competitor is doing this, you'll have to look at a lot of data to figure out if this is happening or not. In some cases, it could be somebody looking at the profile of the person, and this is not completely anonymous, right? If somebody is posting a review on your Play Store, you can actually go and find out who the person is, and you can see if they've done other reviews and things like that, right? So it's a bit of detective work can be done by brands to figure out if they're really affected by this. If you think it's less than 5%, maybe it's not even worth your time to deal with that. But if you think that your reviews are getting massively skewed because somebody is deliberately and voluntarily doing it, do a bit of detective work. If you suspect that there are fake reviews, bring it up with the appropriate platform. They do have ways to deal with these kind of things, and in most cases, they do take action based on complaints made by brands. The second question was about the anonymity and data, right? So it depends. We're talking about a lot of platforms here. If you log into a social listening platform, you can actually, you may not see the name and other details on the platform, but you can actually click back to the original post and see all of these details on Facebook. So for example, if you go to a Facebook page and you comment on it, and we have fetched it into our platform, and it's very, very negative, right? You may not have all the personal details on our platform or another platform like ours, but you can go back to the original comment or the original post. It doesn't matter whether it's Facebook or Twitter or somewhere else. And you can actually see whether or not it's an authentic person, and you can do more research on who they are. So it's anonymous to some extent. Obviously, they're trying to honor their privacy laws and make sure that the people are not abusing them. But at the same time, there is enough transparency in making sure that you can trust that data. It's not a, I would say it's a semi-transparent kind of a system where they don't want to give all of this data away, but they're okay to open up their platform for people to come and see whether or not that post is legit, whether the comment is actually there, and who is the person who's commenting on it. These are for the large networks. For the blogs and forums and review sites, which are not the big Google and Apple kind of review sites, it's a little bit more difficult for sure. And therefore, you need to decide what level of tolerance is okay for your use case. If you're tracking data over a longer period of time, you would have arrived at averages for various things, right? So we have clients who always have a certain amount of negative sentiment, for example. There's nothing, it doesn't matter. Even the best brand in the world would have some negative conversations, and that's a given, right? You don't have to lose your sleep over it. Track your data over a period of time, see what the averages look like, and if it is going beyond your average. So if 7% is your normal average for your industry or for your own brand, lose your sleep if it goes beyond 7 or beyond 9 or 10, right? Don't lose your sleep if it is like 8, for example. Have a bit of tolerance. And all of this can be done in tools. You can actually set up alerts and say, if it goes beyond my average, send me an alert. Those kind of things can be automated if you're using a platform or a tool.
Brilliant. I think that is coming from Mr. Ram. So useful. There are large platforms which provide you semi-transparency, but I think as a brand, we should not lose our sleep over negative commentary. Best of the brands also have some negative comments. Track averages and work if it is above that. We need to worry about it and do something on that. So thank you so much.
But do respond to all of them. Even if you think they're fake, do respond to them.
Keep responding. Don't ignore. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Can I request the person who has raised the hands? I will also take a few questions in the Q&A box after this. But I think whoever has raised the hand, Srikanth, can we request the person to speak?
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
My questions are that how long does it take for a customer to go in for brand verbing? And you had mentioned that you have competitors in Europe. So is your competition more Europe and Western countries based than in Asia, sir?
Okay, I understood the second question about competition, but I didn't understand the first part. Can you repeat that?
You were talking about customers and branding. So
Yes.
going by the trolls and other customer reviews, to take it in a positive way, how long is there any metric to say that it could take such and such time for a brand to become like brand verbing, like Googling or Cadbury's for chocolate brand verbing? So is there any metric to quantify that?
Okay, understood. Okay, let me answer that question first. So we have clients who have over 50 million conversations happening every month, for example, right? We also have clients who have only a few hundred conversations happening, or they may not be tracking their brand. They may just be tracking something that's of interest to them. So for example, we have clients who are interested in tracking a specific industry. They may not be from the industry, but they're interested in the industry. Maybe they invest in that industry. Maybe there's another use case, right? So it really depends upon what you're trying to track. Like, is there a number where social listening is not useful or not useful enough? Or would I consider paying for a platform if I did not have enough conversation? I don't think there's a threshold like that. But if you if you don't have even, I would say 50 conversations about you, if you Google and you found search results and in terms of people talking about you, if it's not even 50, one or two a day, for example, if you don't even have one or two a day, then you should probably not invest in a platform. You should probably just figure this out manually. But even if you're a small company and you wanted to research the market or you wanted to research the competitor before you're launching a product, there might be a lot of conversations happening. So it's not just about how big or small you are, it's about what is your objective? What is a topic that you want to track? Coming to the second question, yes, there are players in this space. Some of the big ones are in Europe and the US. For Asia, there are some companies which are operating specifically in one country, right? So maybe in India only, or in Indonesia only, or in Thailand only, for example, right? What we've done at Radar is we've focused on all of Asia. We wanted to make sure that we were doing it not just for one or two countries, but become the best social listening platform in Asia that was coming out of Asia, coming out of India, coming out of Singapore, coming out of Asia. That's what we wanted to become. So we've not gone head on with these big guys in their territory. We want to be the best in Asia first. We are very, very bullish about Asia. You saw that out of the 4.55 billion users, 60% are in Asia, and that is increasing. Most of the Western countries' demographics are actually either stabilizing in terms of population or even going down. There's a negative adoption for social media as well in terms of frustration. Asia is still growing at a very, very healthy pace. TikTok, which was set up just 4 or 5 years ago, is like head on with some of the really big guys like Instagram and others. We're very bullish about Asia. So we want to continue to put our efforts on Asia to start with. And when the time is right, we'll see what we want to do with Europe and Americas. Right now, we're happy with creating the best platform for Asia.
And sir, you had mentioned about sentiment analysis. So sentiment analysis being a part of content analysis, can the same tools be used to analyze sentiment analysis as well? So like how we analyze the speeches of CEOs or political leaders, the sentiment and the intent.
Absolutely. I mean, we do have clients who use our APIs. They don't use our platform, but they use our APIs because they have their own content. So they don't have a use case for social listening on our platform, but they create their content. So there are some marketplaces which there are some apps where a lot of content, user-generated content is being created, and they want to integrate an API like ours, for example, or even from some of the other big companies out there. So yes, it would typically work. In fact, the models which work very good for social media would definitely work very good for standard language. The standard language where you're following the Shakespearean English or the proper English is a lot easier than the nuances of social media data.
Excellent. Thank you, Lavanya, for raising those questions. If Rupam, Ramna Reddy would like to ask their questions, they can actually raise their hand. But in the meantime, I'll take one, which is suppression of the negative by posting more positive news is the option to handle negative reviews on social media and other platforms?
I would say convert the negative into neutral or positive instead of wasting time on posting fake positives. That will take less time. If your objective is clear, if you really care about your customer, you would solve their problem. There is no point in trying to suppress one negative by putting 10 positive. The platform might mark it as fake eventually. And like I said, they have their algos to figure out what is fake. As a brand, if you really care about your customer, you should be looking at how do I resolve this customer's problem? And in most cases, you will notice that if the problem is resolved swiftly and empathetically, they're likely to come back and thank you on social media. You would have converted a negative into positive, and that would be a very authentic positive.
I think empathy, being empathetic to the customer is the key. So thank you very much for that. The other question is, are there any laws designed to protect the brand interests when there are fake news?
Are there any laws designed to protect the brands if there is fake news? I'm not an expert in this field. Every country has its own laws on how to deal with news. There have been There have been FIRs, for example, in India for fake social media tweets, for fake news. Platforms have their own way of dealing with fake news and eliminating them. So yes, there are laws, but going through that law could be a pretty laborious and long process. So depending upon who that person is who's creating that fake news, you may decide to either just raise it with the platform and get it removed, or follow the course of law. It really depends upon how big a problem it is for you, and whether it's one individual sitting in some tier 3 city, or if it's a big media outlet that you think is worth fighting with, right? So I would say yes, there are laws, but like any other law, it could be a pretty long process. So you may want to have a good think before you decide whether you want to follow the law, follow the legal route rather.
Right. Good. So we'll request Mr. Arun Kaul to also get ready to ask his question. In the meantime, there is one obvious question that has been posted. My customers are talking about me on social media. If it is good about me, then it is fine. But what if it is bad about me? Any problem with my company, product or service, the customer needs to talk to me, not to the world openly. Since I need to sort out his grievance, with more and more people checking the ratings and comments on social media before trying the products or services, it becomes very important for me to ensure that my customer doesn't spread negative anything about my company, product or service. How do I tackle this?
Okay. The first point is your customer is not your slave. Like, they are free to comment about you the way they feel fit. So in one of the slides that I was showing, somebody had rated 1 on 5 for slice, and they basically said they should have this feature. Like, I cannot understand why they don't have this feature, and I'm rating you 1 because of that, right? What do you do as a brand? You can't tell this customer to remove the review. It's a very legitimate review, right? What can you do as a brand? You can take this feedback, right, and pass it on internally. I'm sure the product and engineering teams would, maybe they're already working on it and there's a timeline. Maybe they aren't, but there's a way to prioritize things like this. In any case, if you go back and say, this is a very good feedback, like Elon Musk, for example, he took the feedback and he immediately did something about it, right? And then you have a happy customer. Tesla customers are one of the happiest in the world in terms of how they talk about the Tesla brand, right? And that comes because there is a culture of responding. They know that employees know that Elon Musk will end up responding if they don't respond fast enough, right? How do you build that culture is one thing. But in this case, for example, if you just go back and say, this is a great feedback, I pass this on to the team, and we will let you know once this is done, for example. That would be a much better way to deal with the problem than to say, how do I get this review removed, or how do I handle or tackle this? Your customers are obviously not your slaves. They will post reviews if they're unhappy, and they have a right to do so. The reason there are a lot of those review sites are exactly for this reason, right? Because prospective customers are researching on the internet before they make a purchase decision. And if you really care about those customers coming and buying from you, you need to make sure that you're dealing with your current customers in a good way as well.
Excellent. I think the culture of responding is something which we need to work on and pass on the feedback so that there is corrective action. That's the way to deal with it, rather than expecting customers not to post negative reviews to the world openly. So I think it is sufficiently answered. Thank you very much. Mr. Arun Kaul, can you please raise your question?
Yes, good evening. My question is more for my own understanding and information. I don't know whether you would know about it, but in a large multinational corporation, how many people would be there in a cell which would do this social listening? Because, there would be thousands of, such things coming up. So isn't it very difficult to manage in a big corporation, a big brand name, or even, companies like Vodafone you were talking about, when there could be so many complaints or so many, even compliments every day. How many people do they employ in a cell to listen to this every day? I mean, I'm just wondering that, isn't it a very big volume of work to be handled?
Okay. So I'll split this question into 2 parts. Number one is how many teams, different teams, okay, I'm not just talking about one cell. how many different teams find value with the social media data. So we have clients, really large Fortune 500 clients, where multiple teams, so when I say team, it could be marketing team, social listening team, PR team, it could be a research team, it could be the customer support team, for example. There are multiple teams who might be involved or they might be using the platform at the same time, right? And you might be doing this for multiple countries. Like we have clients who are tracking several countries at the same time, right? All countries in Asia. There are some clients who are tracking globally, right? You're talking about 230 countries being tracked. Not all of them are important for them, but they're tracking. And therefore, they may have real teams in multiple countries. They may have several products and brands. So the use case is different. Like I said, they could have 50 million conversations happening about them every single month. And 1% of them could be support queries, for example, right? You still have a lot of those. So there are teams which have fairly big social media practice or customer support teams. What's the other thing that's happened is in the past, you would have, chat, email, and phone support. And, a lot of these teams have now evolved and social has become a core part of their offering. Agents have been upskilled into providing social media support as well. So there are teams which have hundreds of people providing support, and social could be one form of support that you provide. If a Vodafone customer has a problem, he may call you, he may email you, he may chat with you, or he may just send you a DM or put out a tweet. There are a lot of things that they can do, and agents are now multi-skilled to deal with all of this. So there are large organizations who have hundreds of people just in their customer support teams which do this. Coming to the other use cases, there are when you're listening, typically, our typical customers are marketing teams and customer support teams, right? So marketing teams, you would have the brand team or the PR team, and sometimes, you have your agency involved, which is looking at all of this data. So yes, it's possible for a few hundred licenses to be there on the platform for one single client. It really depends upon how big the company is and what their use cases are, how many countries they're tracking, how many brands they're tracking, and how much, how many conversations are happening online.
These conversations, how are they sifted? I mean, how are they separated? Some may go to marketing, some may go to customer care, some may go to quality or whatever. So how is there a software or are there, platforms which do this?
We have a platform which does this, Arun. If you're interested, we are organizing a webinar next week. I would love to kind of send you an invite. You can email us. We'll send you the link to that invite. We keep doing those monthly webinars. So there are a lot of those platforms. There's a lot of automation happening here. We're talking about millions of data points, and it's not possible for somebody to manually do all of this. So there's a lot of machine learning that is used to automatically classify and tag data into different things. We have machine learning algorithms which can say whether or not an issue is about customer service or about price or about packaging or about delivery or about something else. So there's a lot of automation that's already there, and it's possible to set up rules so that the right teams are getting the message so that they can respond to it. And all the workflows are built into platforms like Radar and other companies also, right? So it's fairly advanced that way.
Thank you very much. It seems very mind-boggling. Thank you.
Yeah, it is indeed mind-boggling, the kind of actions that we are supposed to take, and I'm sure definitely we need experts like Radar to help us. So there's no doubt about it on this. We have come to almost the end of this conversation, Mr. Ram, but I have one observation. I think these bigger platforms like Facebook in particular is also doing a lot of social listening. And whenever I post any event organically on my personal handle about my organization, they tend to stop me in tracks. They don't let it go far. I think that also happens very actively because they compel me to go back and put some money on it and advertise. Am I right?
I mean, it's their platform and they have all the data about you. They know when you sleep, they know when you wake up, they know whether you use mobile or web when you're on Facebook. They know how much money you have. So absolutely, they can do a lot of things on their own platform.
Absolutely. Yeah, it makes business sense for them not to allow any traction for an organic post which intends some business, like the current conversation which I posted on my Facebook hasn't gone really far. When we posted it on our institutional handle, it has gone far. That's a different story altogether. But LinkedIn has allowed greater traction compared to Facebook. So that's my observation. And this happens consistently. And I'm sure they are very active on social listening, as you mentioned. So Mr. Ram, thank you very much for this pretty long and interesting conversation, which is quite eventful in terms of its rich content and the expanse of the landscape that you have covered. I think all the participants today have gained numerous insights from this conversation, and we have all the actions to take at our own end and review. And probably, as you have mentioned in the beginning, we need to have teams, we need to have plans, we need to have strategies for social listening. And a large number of companies, medium to large, in India, small, assuming that small have actually not done, have not actively taken to social listening. And this is a huge market line there for people like you to tap into. And more than that, I think it is for the businesses to understand what's happening around them. It is in their own interest that they pick up social listening. The tools are available. They need to keep on cross-checking what the customers are talking about. The thumb rule that you mentioned is they are talking negative about you. Don't worry about the positive things. If it is positive, they will never talk about it, generally speaking, but they are talking about negative things, and we should know what is that negativity and to what degree that negativity can affect us. If it is above the average, we should immediately act on it. And some of the templates and some of the best practices that you have shared across various facets of handling social listening or handling negative commentary or dealing with these kind of situations in our business, I think those best practices will stay with us for a longer time. We are going to make a summary of this conversation. I would request you to share this PPT with us, and I will also share a text copy of this conversation, and we'll take a nod from you. It is going to be very, very useful. Our participants are going to go back to our archives and check some of the points that you have mentioned. It is impossible to actually summarize many. There are numerous points. It is impossible to summarize all of them. So summary in a text form, which we put up a couple of days down the line, will be very, very useful for all of us for learning purposes. I want to thank you for the patient responses that you have given throughout. And this session has actually been a blockbuster session, which has crossed my own expectation in terms of the time, in terms of the intent, in terms of the content and the intensity. That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Mr. Ram, for this time and expertise.
Thank you, Mr. Sudhakar, and thank you, Professor Prasad, for having me. This was really, really interesting. I think the questions were really good. For some of them, I had to think hard. I hope that the audience was able to learn something from today's session. I would be very happy if they're able to go back and to their organization and see if social listening is being used, question that, and see if some of these insights can be put to good use in wherever they are.
Sure. I think we are going to take feedback from them as well. I'll share the chat commentary as well as feedback with you, Mr. Ram, and I'll also share the summary a couple of days down the line. But I want to thank all the participants for their enthusiastic participation today. The questions have been really interesting, as Mr. Ram has mentioned. Several takeaways, several learnings have come our way because of these questions. Those who have not asked questions also gained quite a bit, in my view. I think it is important for all of us to come back on these Friday leadership conversations and keep raising questions and keep conversing with leaders like Mr. Ram. Similarly, next week at 4:30 p.m., we have Dr. Jitendra Sharma, who is going to talk about the innovations in the medical technology landscape, how it is emerging in India and abroad. I think we are going to have a fantastic conversation slated for next Friday. That is on that's on September 30th. And we will have all of you back for an interesting conversation. I hope that you'll be there. So thank you very much for your time, and do take care. Do read about social listening, mull over the points that have been raised by Mr. Ram, and check whether social listening has been used and what is the scope for using it in your own organization. And these best practices will definitely help all of us. Thank you once again. Do take care. See you next Friday.